Welcome to the Hunting Beast Podcast, your source for hunting tactics, news, and stories. And now your host, Mario Traficante.
Hello, and welcome to Episode 3 of the Hunting Beast Podcast. Today we will be discussing river bottoms and small woodlots with Hunting Beast member and moderator Stanley Schmidt.
Alright, well, welcome to this week's podcast. We have Stanley Schmidt, member of the Hunting Beast site. Stan is an active member of the Hunting Beast site. He shares a lot of information to help contribute to other members of the site over several years of hunting whitetails, and he's a guy that not only talks the talk, is also walk the walk. So we're happy to have him on, and today he's going to focus on covering river bottom hunting and small woodlot hunting. With that, welcome Stan, and how you doing this morning?
Hey, how you doing, Mario? Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I just wanted to give you a little thank you note, and I think I speak for the rest of the Hunting Beast too, for taking your time to do these podcasts.
Yeah, this has been fun. Learn a lot about things I can use for next season, and so it's been fun for me. So I guess to start off, we can just talk about, you've been at this game for a long time. Maybe you want to give us a little bit of history of what got you into whitetail hunting, what got you into hunting in general.
Well, when I was growing up as a kid, my father was not a hunter. So how I got interested in it, I just picked it up on my own, and everything that I learned, I kind of had to learn on my own. So at that time, there were no magazines, books, hardly any. There was no internet, no DVDs, none of that kind of stuff. And the fact that there were very few deer back then when I first started. So my learning cycle was very slow compared to the modern day hunters like right now. I mean, they have so many resources available that their learning cycle is way quicker, faster than it was for me back when I started.
Sure. One of the things you said, how you had to do a lot of learning on your own. I'm assuming that a lot of the learning that you did was on foot in the field and spending time in the woods. Probably contrast to what a lot of guys do now is they're reading a lot of articles, they're watching a lot of videos. How do you think that helped you by spending that time just in the woods observing and doing those sort of things?
Well, I honestly think that the lack of resources that I had was a big deterrent. Compared to like the modern day guys, they can get on the beast, for example, and they can learn things in a couple of days that took me years to put together. And I think that's one of the biggest differences.
I think probably a good lesson from that is that we've seen from time to time guys will come on the beast, they'll learn a tactic or a technique, they'll go out and try to put it into practice, and maybe they have a small success, or maybe they even have a failure on that first try, and they have a tendency to get discouraged. What could you tell them from what you just said, where some of those tactics and techniques, it took you years of trial and error to figure out and perfect? Is it, you're not going to get it on the first try a lot of times, right?
Oh, I agree 100% on that, Mario. You just have to pay your dues. It's that simple. You can't go out and in any sport or any phase of life and be at the top. You know, you have to start at the bottom, work your way up to that top level tier, and it takes time. You know, you can't do it overnight. And I think a lot of guys, like you said, read, well, I can go out and find this buck bed and I can kill a buck out of it. Well, you know, that's more than likely not going to happen the first time out, and it may not happen the first year out.
Right.
You just have to pay your dues.
What are some of things that you always do as you enter the woods or when you're in stand, little nuances that you pick up on? I mean, having a lot of time on stand tend to build sort of this sixth sense of when you know there's a certain mood or a certain feeling, the temperature, the weather is getting into a certain time frame, and you know that it's going to get good. Are there things like that you draw upon?
But just about in any sport, you get a feel for what can take place or what should take place, and it's like you say, a sixth sense. Basketball players have it on a 3-point shot. Some days they can hit it, and they know it. You know, they'll feel it, and that's kind of the way it is with hunting. Also, you get into a spot and you say, "This is it. That buck's going to be there," and that applies with fishing too. You get into a spot and you know there's going to be a fish there.
Right. And that's sort of a culmination of being in those locations time after time after time, and maybe experiencing success when you see the same sort of setup, the same wind conditions, the temperature, the time of the year, and it's like you just know that this is going to be a good spot.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You just feel it. Sometimes it doesn't pay off, of course, and sometimes that buck bed is empty, or that bedding area that you think that buck is there, but sometimes it happens.
What are some things that, you know, as you've progressed through the years and hunted, what are some things that you've changed or transitioned from early on when you first started hunting till now?
Well, I think just about like anyone, you learn, and then you apply what you learn, and that takes time also, and then you just gradually evolve into a hunter. You don't start the first day being a big buck killer. And I also one of the biggest things that I evolved through the years was hunting in the best spots at the best times. When I first started out, I wanted to hunt every day and every hour of the day, and so I would select spots that weren't as good as the other spots that I had that were better, and I would sit in those spots when in reality I was wasting time. I could have been sitting home watching football instead of sitting in those spots.
Right.
So that is one big thing that I picked up over the years, is to not sit in junky spots.
So it's the concept of hunting smarter, not always hunting harder. And you're not the first person that I've heard say that that's had a history of hunting and taking bigger bucks as kind of their life schedule changes. They say that, well, you know, if you would have asked me 20 years ago, I would have just told you that I hunted every day, all day, and if that buck had any chance of getting up out of its bed and walking by me, I was going to be in my stand, you know. But now I really pick and choose the times in the spots based on the weather, the time of the year, the specific location. And I'm just as successful, but I'm not spending a lot of that time, as much time on stand.
Yeah, those are good points, Mario. And a lot of guys, when they first start out, they're like I was. They almost make a job out of it, where they figure they have to be out there. And that's the way I was. I figured if I was out there, I was doing what I should be doing. But as I progressed through the years, I found out that really that wasn't the right way to go about it.
Well, and for some guys, I mean, that brings up another good point, is what if you only have a small, limited amount of places where you can hunt? Kind of what I've learned from the site, because I used to do this on a piece of property that I hunt, and I used to want to get out there and hunt, but I would overhunt it, because I would be there weekend after weekend after weekend, because I felt, like you said, the more time I spend on stand, I'm bettering my chances, but maybe I was doing more harm than good because my presence was there all the time instead of just during the good times.
Yeah, those are great points. I was guilty of that. I'd go into a spot, I'd hunt it, and then the next day I would go back to that spot, and until you start to realize, you start seeing less deer every time you go in.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, it's a teaching experience too, you know. And until you go in there and do it a few times, and then every time you go in there, there's less deer sightings and less deer sightings. You got to learn from that. You can't just keep doing that.
Right. Well, I mean, would you say that all things being equal, conditions and everything, that first sit is typically when you get your most action?
I think that's pretty well documented. You go on and talk to just about everyone, and just about every hunter with any amount of experience will agree that first sit is the best. And of course, in the beast style, like Dan Infalt does, when you hunt a bed, the first time you hunt that bed is the best time. You know, he doesn't go into and hunt a bed, or look at a bed and then go back and hunt it. He has it preset where he's going to go in and hunt it one time and then probably not again. And that's kind of what I do. I very seldom hunt a stand 2 days in a row. I just don't like to, and I have more fun hunting a different set.
Sure.
And it's just a variety. That's kind of the spice of hunting.
Yeah. So I guess with that, we can get into hunting river bottoms and small farm woodlots. Maybe you want to start out with telling us about some of your river bottom hunts, some tactics or techniques that you like to use or employ in those sets or scenarios.
Yeah, I actually really love river bottom hunting. That's probably one of my most favorite types of hunting is river bottoms, and I don't do as much now as I used to because I lost my good river bottom spots, and that happens to everyone. You lose your hunting spots. The best thing that I like about river bottoms is you can go into a river bottom and you know which direction the deer aren't going to come from. And that's a big key there. They're not going to come from the river. Once in a while, a buck may swim across the river, but it's so remote. It's just not even in the plan. I always, when I river bottom hunt, I always let my wind blow into the river if I can. It's just a perfect situation and a perfect scenario. If your wind is blowing into the river, you're not ruining any of the other areas that a buck can come from.
So then you're typically setting up with, I guess, you're trying to get your back to the river then, in the most part, huh?
I love to do it that way.
Yeah.
And I used to, when I first started doing a lot of river bottom hunting, I would not hunt a spot unless I could come in from the river and, I would float to the spot that I was going to hunt, and I could just lurk in there. I could sneak in there. There's no ground scent. There's no noise. There's no visibility of a hunter being there. I could just coast in, tie up to the bank, crawl up, and I'd have 20 yards of ground scent, and it was just a perfect setup.
So in those setups, how did you know the deer would be working their way towards the river?
The best case scenario is if you have a bend where the bend goes up into the timber, and then that kind of creates an automatic bottleneck. Then if you have the bedding area on either side of that bend, then you can set up there, and it's just a perfect scenario. Whether it be doe bedding on either side or buck bedding on one side and doe bedding on the other, if you're in between, you're in a good spot. The bend would be like you have peninsulas, and Dan hunts a lot of peninsulas, where he talks about peninsulas, where I actually hunt on the other side of the river from the peninsula, on that bend. I hunt more on the inside bends, and he hunts more on the outside bends.
So when you're hunting that inside bend, when you come down the river, would you position yourself centered of the horseshoe?
A lot of times the wind would dictate whether you would be on which side of the bend.
Okay.
So you would have the wind in your best favor.
To blow into the river.
Right. That's just, for me, it was always key to have my wind blowing into the river. So if the bend pushed up to the north and the wind was from the northeast, then I could hunt one side of the bend, or if it was northwest, could hunt the other side of the bend. You see what I'm saying?
Yep. And so did you find that typically, because that bend jutted up into the timber, it was a good spot because the deer were forced to travel that transition? Like you said, it was sort of a bottleneck of them having to go around the river there?
Well, there's a couple of things that come into play. That, what you just said, it's a terrific bottleneck there. Plus, if I'm hunting on a bend that pushes up into the timber or the river bottoms, and I'm hunting a north wind, then the north wind will push the deer or cause them to travel closer to the river, because danger, the deer doesn't come from the river. Predators don't attack a deer from the river. They just feel safe, walking the river edge. It's an automatic travel route for them.
Right.
And the more days in a row that I would have a north wind, the better the deer movement would be. They would hug the river because they had one safe edge. There was no danger going to come from that way.
So on these, you said you'd usually go in. I'm assuming you took a canoe in on most cases, or a small boat.
I used actually 3 different boats when I was doing a lot of river hunting. I had a little boat that I would paddle, and I used it more for creeks.
Yeah.
If I had a creek that I was gonna go across, and then I could really sneak in with that. That was really a stealth way to get in. And then I had a couple other bigger motor boats, and I would shut the gas motor off a couple of miles from where I was wanting to hunt, and then I would float down and use a trolling motor to get to the spot that I wanted to hunt. Like if there was a known bedding area, then I could just lurk down in there, quiet, no noise, no visibility. Like I say, just a perfect setup.
How did you do most of your setups? Were you hunting out of a stand, or were you hunting from the ground?
Both. I would take a portable stand, or I would just hunt on the ground.
Would you and this is probably an obvious answer, I guess, but did you sort of predetermine whether or not you were going to go in stand or from the ground, or did you a lot of times just do that based on what you found as you got in there on foot?
Well, as I would learn an area, I could do more tree stands. But if I was in a fairly newer area, then a ground blind worked better, because I could go in, and I always had a little camp stool.
Sure.
And I carried that, and I would just set up and watch.
Is there a particular, I guess, hunt or story related to a river bottom hunt that you did that kind of sticks out in your mind as one that's maybe more memorable, or where things kind of came together?
Actually, I have a lot of stories, but the one that sticks in my mind, I think it was 1990, which is going back a few years. So, but I had hunted long, I had hunted hard, I had hunted all season, and I just wasn't clicking. And it was either the second to the last day or the last day of the season, and I had seen a really good buck in this area. So the wind was right, the weather was right, so I floated down in there, and I set up on this buck, and I used my camp stool. I just crawled in I set up, and the buck came through perfect, and he was a really nice. I think he was an 11-pointer, just wide and tall tined, and I muffed the shot.
Yeah.
We're talking the last half hour of the season.
Sure.
And to me, I didn't kill the buck, but that's one of my most memorable that I can remember. He was just a good buck, and I muffed him. I missed him.
Now, that particular setup where you said, the wind was right, the weather was right, how long had you been hunting that particular area? Like, how did you know those are the perfect conditions to go in there and potentially get a shot at a nice buck?
Yeah, that was a spot that I had hunted for a few years, and like I say, I lost that spot too. But yeah, I had a lot of experience in that spot, and I knew the where the bucks traveled. I didn't necessarily know where he was bedding because I didn't have permission to hunt where the buck was bedding, but I knew the direction he was coming from, and I knew the direction he was going to, and I set up on it. I did everything right except I didn't execute the shot.
But that had to give you confidence, and nonetheless, because you knew all your pre-planning on the setup of where he was coming and going from, as well as how you access the area, was all spot on. The shot part you can work on and fix, right?
Well, yeah, and I did, and the next year, I think if I remember right, I think I killed a buck, a really good buck, out of that same spot. Late in the season too. It was like maybe Thanksgiving or a little after. So yeah, I mean, I learned from it, but it was a tough lesson.
So with some of these spots especially at the river bottom, you said that you had a spot and you lost that spot. Have you experienced any situations where, as you've been successful and taken some bigger bucks out of areas that's kind of been to your detriment, because then the people the property that you're hunting on, they get excited and then they want to hunt there themselves? Or have you ran into that at all?
Well, any of the spots that I hunted, there were other hunters there. I wasn't alone. There were the spots that I hunt were guys just knock on doors and they'd let you hunt.
Right.
But not me, but just about anybody. And I had to deal with other hunters and coon hunters, and
So that's kind of another good point. How big are these areas that you're talking about with the river bottoms for the most part? Are we talking several hundred acres, or under 50 acres? And how did you work around having other people in those areas that you were hunting?
Well, I'll tell you what, you can use other hunters to your advantage, and I used to do this a lot. One of the places that I hunted, and it was in the river bottoms, and I had 150 acres that the guy let me hunt, and there were hunters on both sides of that 150 acres, and quite a few. But the one area had a hunter that he would walk every day. He'd get done hunting and he would walk the timber. I don't know what he was doing, and I have no clue, but he just liked to walk.
So
So I would,
he'd get down early and just walk in the woods.
yeah, he would get done hunting in the morning and he would walk the woods. And don't see what he was looking for, but he did it day after day. But I used that to my advantage. I would see his truck parked, and I would see when he would leave. So I made sure that I was in the spot that I wanted to be in before he got there and after he left. And I remember one day I was hunting that spot, and I came in from the river, and he walked in from the north, and he got done hunting, and it was in the morning hunt. He got done hunting, and he pushed about 15 deer, and 4 of them were nice bucks, and I passed them. And I bumped into the guy later in the day, and he said, "Hey, the hunting was pretty slow this morning, wasn't it?" He had no clue that he had bumped those 15 deer.
Those deer, sure.
He never saw deer. And I just said, "Yeah, it was pretty slow, wasn't it?"
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting how, you effectively patterned him and what he was doing.
Absolutely. And you can do that, whether you're hunting public ground or private ground. If you got guys that you got to work around, work around them to your advantage.
Yeah, good point. Good point. All right. Well, maybe you want to kind of talk a little bit about hunting small woodlots or farmland. I know that you said that you had some advice and some tactics when it comes to those spots.
Yeah, I've done a lot of small woodlot farm ground hunting, and it's really tough in some respects because some of the areas are 25 acres.
Okay.
And you can burn out 25 acres in one hunt. And of course, when you're hunting those smaller woodlots, the deer aren't gonna, or the bucks aren't gonna be living in those small lots for the most part. They're gonna live in bed everywhere.
So I guess that's a good question or point. You mentioned this when you were talking about river bottoms. If you know that the deer are not bedding on a particular small spot that you're hunting, how do you form your strategy in order to get on a buck, or how do you recognize the fact that a buck is on an adjacent property, or is that done? Would you do that through scouting in the spring, or shining, or how did you go about identifying these bucks were on adjacent properties to know that you could hunt them?
Most of the time, I would go out or observation stand so that I could see where the buck was coming from or what direction. Because, like I say, if you're hunting 25 acres and the bucks are not there and they're coming from another area, you're going to sit back and glass. You could use observation stands, whatever it takes to get you on that buck. And
what time of the year would you start doing that? Is that a process that you would do all summer long, or?
Well, you can do it all summer long, but normally the feeding patterns change where the bucks don't hold a pattern from like say in August into October.
Okay.
In especially in ag country, the food sources change, and of course that changes where the areas that the bucks will be, and beans are a great example. When the beans are green, the bucks are in them. When the beans are yellow, they kind of don't go in them as much. And of course the beans are green in August, so if you're glassing in August and then the beans switch to yellow and you're glassing and that'd be like October, there's a big difference. They're not going to be there. So you gotta kind of keep track of and follow where these bucks would come from.
Would you keep a journal or notes on particular areas in the deer traffic in those areas as you did your glassing?
I was always kind of lackadaisical about that. I never kept a journal. I just kept mental notes.
Sure.
I guess is what you call it. But I was never much of a writer, so I just didn't keep any written journals. I just never did.
So, do you have a particular, I guess, hunt and I guess related tactics you want to share with one of your woodlot hunts, or maybe a couple of your woodlot hunts?
Yeah, I've got a good hunt story. Thinking back here, like I say, my mental notes. I think it was 1981, and I had patterned this buck in early October, and I knew he was coming out of a small woodlot, and I'm talking small. It was 7 acres, and it was a triangular shaped 7 acres, and there was corn planted on both sides of this 7 acres, which really made it an isolated spot, and that's why he was in there. But he came up from the south and went into the bean fields. The beans were combined at that time, and he was in there, and the does were kind of in there feeding on these bean shaft.
Right.
After they pick the combine, leaves a bunch of, and the deer just love that stuff. So at opening day, the wind was right. I snuck up through the corn, and I killed the buck. He just followed pattern.
So was he bedded in the triangle?
He was bedded in the triangle, and he would travel to the tip of that triangle, and there was a fence line, and I call it a corridor, where he could walk down this corridor where there was 2 fields of beans, but there was a fence line in between them, and he would walk that fence line up to this bean field. And he held that pattern. On the opening day, I killed him.
So when you entered in, then you said you entered in from the corn. I'm assuming you had the wind. You had the wind to your face then as you entered in. So all was based on kind of positioning yourself. How did you position yourself along that corridor?
The wind was out of the east that day, so I came in from the west. I had to make a great big loop through this cornfield.
Okay.
It was kind of I made a loop through the cornfield, and I cut in 90 degrees from where I suspected he would come from.
And what direction were the bean fields in then? To the
bean fields were to the north.
To the north, okay.
And he would cross the road an old gravel road, and I parked on that gravel road about half a mile to the west, and I cut in to the corn, and I walked down through the corn, and then I cut over to that triangle point. I didn't even have a tree stand. I just climbed up into a tree, and that's how I killed that buck.
I suspect we're going to get some people questioning back for you to post a diagram of a couple of these hunts, because that seems like a pretty neat setup.
Yeah, that was a pretty good setup, and like I say, that was one of those times where it just worked perfect. And I did not know his exact spot that he bedded in, but I knew he was in that 7 acres, so I didn't really need to know his exact bed. I needed to know his travel route, and it was just, that tip of that triangle was a perfect funnel, and he followed it down into that fence row and just walked in between. He could walk into in that corridor in between those 2 cornfields real safe, and he could duck into either side if there was any danger. It was a perfect setup for him, and it was better for me.
Right. So how did you, in that particular scenario, how did you first, I guess, come upon that buck, or how did you realize that he was in there? Did you say the gravel road was adjacent to the bean field?
I found that buck by accident. I was coming back from fishing, and I saw that buck. It was like maybe late September, early October, and I saw the buck. So then I kept an eye on him, and I kept my eyes open and my mouth shut.
Right. So you kept going back to that same spot and glassing what he was doing.
Yeah. I just keep an eye on him, and he wouldn't come out there every night, but a lot of nights he did. So, and he was with a little 6-point. There was a little 6-point buck. It was just a 2 bachelor group of them.
What's a good number of spots that you try to have at your disposal, in order to keep yourself mobile and moving around?
I guess you have as many as you can.
Yeah.
Right. But I have 3 primary spots, and they're all in different locales. I don't have a spot that I can walk out my back door. I have to travel. I have to do a lot of traveling to get to a couple of spots. And the reason for that is I have friends that own farms now.
Sure.
And I'm able to hunt those properties. So,
is there a particular, I guess, setup or pattern that you've seen on these woodlot farms, maybe due to what you mentioned earlier, the agriculture that's growing on there, or how the woodlots are broken up between the timber and the agriculture, that's sort of a pattern that you've seen play out over and over again?
Well, actually, when you're hunting ag country, it's a continual change for the buck, because he has a tremendous amount of cover in August, September, October, and then all of a sudden they start picking the corn, and then his cover is cut down, and then the next guy picks the field and his cover is cut down even more. So as the season progresses, for instance, that 7-acre that I hunted, more than likely he wouldn't have stayed in there when the fields were picked on either side of that 7 acre.
Right.
He probably wouldn't have moved out, went down into the bigger timbers. So it's always changing, and it's not always changing for the better for the buck, but actually for the hunter, there's less cover, so the hunter has less cover to look at, and the buck has less places to hide.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. It's almost I guess when guys are out looking for these smaller overlooked spots in agriculture lots. I mean, the example you brought up where there's a small 7 acre triangle in the middle of 2 cornfields and a bean field, it is almost really like the perfect scenario because it's a little safe zone for the time being that buck can hang out in, where he's got a heavy cover escape routes to both sides. And like you said, that would probably be a temporary home for him during certain times of the year, because once that corn's down, then obviously any hunter, as it gets into gun season, is going to have more viewability and more access to that 7 acres. And that buck will probably vacate that spot.
Yeah, and that's been my experience when those agricultural fields are picked. The buck does change, and he usually goes into a bigger timber parcel, or he'll change into a CRP or someplace where he has a bigger area to hide in.
Have you ever seen with the agricultural lots and connection to good food sources, bucks competing for maybe the primary bedding areas that are adjacent to those lots, those farms?
I can't really say that I've ever seen the bucks competing for a spot. There's probably unlimited amount of spots when the crops are in, so they don't have to compete then. So maybe they would later on, but I really haven't noticed anything like that. If there is a competition for a better bedding area or a better spot.
So, I mean, you've been at this for a while, and I've seen from your posts on some of the more recent bucks that you've taken, you're still out there mobile hunting. I mean, you have your mobile stand and you're getting into these different areas. I guess, how have you been able to keep that up, over the years, and with picking and choosing your spots? Has it, affecting your stand height or how you get into cover? What are some different tricks that you do or you use in order to stay mobile?
You're right. It's a challenge the older you get. I mean, I can't put a stand on my back anymore and walk 5 miles into a swamp. I can't do it anymore. I'm not physically capable.
Right.
So I have to pick and choose the spots that I hunt. And, a young guy that's 22, 25 years old, shoot, they can walk all day. I just can't do that. So I have to pick and choose. But that's part of the aging process. You learn a little bit about using your head instead of your back.
Right.
And that's a big deal for me. I just have to hunt smarter. I don't have the physical tools that I did when I was younger. And those are great points, Mario. These younger guys don't realize it yet, but they'll go through it too. Or an injury can do that.
Sure.
You read on the Beast where some guy has I just read something where a guy had a knee injury and was going to be out for a while. He just has to adjust. You can still hunt. You can still do things. One of our members is in a wheelchair. He still hunts. You know, it's not the end of all when you get old or you have an injury. You just adjust.
Yeah, you make adjustments.
Yeah.
What I know you mentioned during hunting the river bottoms that you liked having the wind blowing over the river, and you've seen in a lot of your cases when you had the wind coming from the north. On these small farm lots, is there a specific wind that you saw that played to your favor, whether it be in relationship to the corn or the bean field, or how a specific property was set up? I know the one small farm that I hunt, it typically has a southwest wind almost all the time. What have you experienced in a lot of your spots? Is there changing winds, or are the winds fairly consistent? Or
No, I would say that the winds are pretty variable, and I like that. In fact, I love that because it allows me to hunt a different spot more effectively. I have spots that I have mental notes. Well, this is a north wind spot, or this is a south wind spot, or this is an east wind, or this is a west wind. So I make sure that I have spots available for all different wind directions, not just one, like a southwest wind.
Sure.
Or something like that. I keep myself, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but I keep just...
Yeah, you keep your options open, I would say, right?
Yeah, and that allows me to hunt a different stand every time out. If the wind is blowing from the north for days on end, well then, man, you can run out of spots in a hurry if you hunt small farm lots. That's for sure.
Now, with these small farm lots, are there some spots that, your access point probably, that has to play a lot into your strategy, right?
The access point is the key to all strategies.
Okay.
In my opinion, you can't hunt a small woodlot with an east wind and come in from the wrong direction. You
Right.
gotta come in to that small woodlot with the wind in your face. It just does not work if you're going into a small woodlot with the wind at your back. It just does not work. I absolutely will not hunt a spot if the conditions aren't right to kill the buck.
Okay.
It's just that simple. I learned years ago that you cannot waste your time hunting a spot that you can't kill the buck. You're just wasting your time. You're spinning your wheels. So if I can't get the access that I want, yeah, I probably would just abandon the spot.
Sure.
And that has happened.
Well, do you have any other, any other hunts to share that you think are memorable ones, or ones that bring out a particular tactic that you like to use?
I killed a buck a couple of years ago on Halloween, and it was kind of a random hunt, and I had I think it was 2012, and I was hunting quite a ways from home, like 4 hours, and I had the wind was right for that spot, so I had a plan all set up in my mind. So I got into the timber. The wind was right. The conditions were right. And I noticed that the white oaks were dropping some acorns.
Okay.
And I saw a bunch of turkey scratchings where the turkeys were trying to get these acorns. So I thought, man, this could be a good setup. So I set up on that spot. I had a mobile stand, and I set up on that spot, and I saw, I think it was a 9-point, and I passed him up. He come through. About an hour later, he was nibbling on.
Was this a spot that you had identified on a map previously, or did you know the spot from before? How did you go about?
I knew the spot before, and it was a friend of mine's farm, and I had hunted it before, and that was one of the rare occasions. The next day, the conditions were the same, so I went back to that exact same spot, and I killed the buck as he come through feeding on those acorns. So that was one of the times where I did hunt 2 days in a row, the exact same spot, but the conditions were just so right, and the buck that I didn't shoot never got me, and I was able to sneak in and sneak out without any bucks or deer seeing me. So I figured my chances were pretty good, and they were. And like I say, I killed a buck the next day, which was Halloween Day.
I mean, did you expect that many acorns dropping when you got into that spot? It was one of those things where once you saw that, you knew that this was sort of the perfect combination of a setup and conditions to hunt it multiple times.
No, I had no idea that acorns were dropping because I hadn't been on that place yet. Like I say, it's 4 hours from home. I just capitalized on the situation that was available. And I knew it was a good area, and I knew where the buck bedding was at, and that's where I was headed, towards the buck bedding, when I saw these turkey scratchings. That's what brought attention to the acorns.
So there you raise a very good point, and it kind of touches on what Dan talked about in a previous podcast about deer sign. So, you entered this woodlot not knowing that there'd be acorns dropping. You had a plan in your mind to make it to a bedding area to hunt. You came across the acorns dropping and the turkey scratchings, and you put up your mobile stand and hunted there. You end up seeing a buck on the first day, end up shooting a buck on the second day.
Yeah, I mean, I just adapted to what I thought was a good situation, which was a good scenario, and my plan was that the bucks would be coming from this bedding area and going towards, I think it was a cornfield at the time. It was either a corn or a bean field, I can't remember, but I knew they would be feeding, and this is a good point. The bucks will be on their feet in secluded areas during daylight hours, but they're not going to be out in an open field, but in a area with a lot of cover, they will show themselves. And that buck did, and it cost him his life.
Right. And he might have been using that area with the acorns to sort of stage out of the bedding.
I think so, yeah.
If I didn't have any idea where that bedding was in relationship to the cornfield, what do a lot of guys do? They walk into a farm area like that and they hunt on the edge of a field. Or, they watch a TV show and they see that a guy puts up a stand on the edge of a field and he sees a big buck come walking by. So, they'll set up their stand on the edge of the cornfield and wait, but those bucks might not even get to them before dark because they're just too far off.
Yeah, a lot of guys watch these TV shows and get the idea that that's how it's done, and that's unfortunate, because 99% of us aren't going to be able to hunt like those guys do. Let's face it.
Right.
You got to be real. You just have to be in check with reality. We don't have that type of ground to hunt, and we don't have the resources that those guys do, and that's just the bottom line.
Yeah.
If you think that that's the way hunting is, you're just fooling yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, in my opinion, to some extent, it takes a lot of the fun out of it. I mean, there's a lot of strategy of trying to get in and get into an area where you can get yourself a good buck. And you've put a lot of time into it, trying to figure it out and setting up a plan. There's a sense of accomplishment when you go through and do that.
Yeah, I mean, just if you watch, as an example, if you watch one of these celebrity hunts, one of their DVDs, and if you watch a Dan Infalt DVD, you're going to see a huge difference, and the huge difference is the Dan Infalt DVD is the average run-of-the-mill everyday hunter like we all are.
Right.
And the celebrity hunt is not what we are or who we are or how we hunt.
Very true. So with that, I guess, before we wrap it up, is there anything, in general that you can give as advice to younger hunters wanting to get into this sport? And, since you've been doing it for so long, what are some, I guess, words of encouragement you can give guys that are maybe starting out and they're not having the success that they want, or they're, what are some things you can tell them?
I think one of the biggest things that I see the modern day or the newer younger hunters, they kind of are brainwashed from the get-go into thinking that they can do anything they put their mind to it. Well, the advice that I have is you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
We will have limitations.
Right.
The guy might be 5'5" and 100 pounds, 125 pounds. He's not going to be able to carry a stand 5 miles in, but people say, yeah, you can do it. You just got to do it. Well, you don't have to be the best. You just have to do your best, and that's the advice that I would give. Don't try and be like the best out there. Just do what you're capable of, and don't extend yourself beyond that, because you're in for some failure if you do. For the average guy, just thinking that he can be a chess player and beat a grandmaster, that's not going to happen.
Right.
You don't have the brain power that a grandmaster chess player does. So you have to play chess on your own level. You can't beat Bobby Fischer at playing chess. It's not going to happen.
Well, I suspect we're going to get some comments back on some diagrams, possibly of the river bottom horseshoe that you preferred to hunt, as well as that woodlot scenario that had the triangle in between the two cornfields. I think you might have to break out your artistic skills to draw a couple of diagrams for some guys. But I just want to thank you, Stan, for taking the time and talking to us. I know a lot of guys on the site were excited to hear you talk. And
well, I also want to thank you too for doing this, because the Beast members really enjoy these podcasts, and without your help in putting them together, it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, no problem. Like I said, it's been fun doing. And as always, if you guys out there have questions or comments on anything, post back on the forum and we can keep the talks going. Thank you again, Stan, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Okay, you too, Mario. It was good chatting with you.
Talk to you later.
That concludes today's podcast episode. Please go to thehuntingbeast.com to post any discussions, questions, or comments regarding today's podcast episode.